After Thoreau passed on, a number of people followed him and worshipped him and learned from him. One of them was a gentleman named William Brewster, and he lived in Brattle Street in Cambridge, but he bought this property and this house called October Farm, and he would spend most of his weekends out here with other friends. And he was a bird collector before the age of telephoto lenses and binoculars that worked and so forth. But he became the president of the Massachusetts Audubon Society, and this was his home. And he bought a big property here, and he would take the train out to Bedford and take a canoe across the river and walk here to get away from the city life in Cambridge. Okay, well, as we're here, there's a couple of different flowers. This is one of the fleabanes, which means it must have some insect repellent properties of some sort. The fleabanes have shorter petals than later in the summer when we see asters. So fleabanes are sort of small-petaled asters of early summer. In late summer, we've got longer-petaled variety of species of asters. This red right here is known as the curly leaf dock, D-O-C-K, like the dock of the bay. And that is not invasive, but it's not native, but it does show around here, but very distinctive with these red seed heads. The orange is the orange daylily, unrelated to most of the true lilies, and not a problem. And these are edible. It's called a daylily because the flower is only out for one day, whereas other flowers might be out for several weeks, the same flower. And this is the daylily, and it can, as it folds up the second day, like you see here on the left, that can be taken off. And unlike many lilies, which are quite poisonous, this is actually edible and can be chopped up and put into salads. Quite tasty. No, just kidding, just kidding. Most of the ferns we have here are called sensitive ferns. And there's two reasons they use the word sensitive, and we're not sure which is right. One is that when we get the first 40-degree Fahrenheit day in the fall, not true freeze, but just cool, they turn brown, whereas other ferns will stay green. So that may be that they're sensitive to near frosts. Other people say it's called sensitive fern because it's named after the American male who was so sensitive to the wishes of his female relatives and friends and spouse. That might not be true. Now, another plant of interest over here is lettuce. Most of us know the lettuce that we have in our salads virtually every day. It's in the same genus. This can't be eaten right off the stem, but this is some of our wild blue lettuce growing up here. But it's the same genus, Lactuca. As we look at the trees in the distance, we'll see that reddish tree, and that would be a European beech tree. And in the wild, they're not dark red like that, but horticulturally, people like some color other than green. So we do see that here. And then we see a few willows, some black locust. There's a birch tree over here, the white bark tree over there behind the big oak. And we are now up on Monument Street on the north side of Concord, to the west of the Concord River, in an area called Monument Street. Very nice street, and because it does not go east-west into Boston, there's relatively little traffic here, but a nice part of the world. And Henry canoed in this area and walked these woods, the Estabrook Woods just across the street, many, many times in his life. Henry cared a lot about turtles and, of course, all of nature, and it's very interesting. The first time I've seen this, a formal sign saying snapping turtle nest. Please stay away. And I can see that the babies may have already hatched because I can see some shells right here of the spent shells. Now I hope these are babies that may have hatched on their own, or maybe a raccoon or something has dug them up. We never know, because skunks and raccoons do go after, and they have great senses of smell. But that's great to see, because our turtles have trouble, especially crossing roads, and we have several that should not be rare, but they've probably been run over so many times they just can't carry on their genes. But that's very nice to see. And here, while we're at it, a Deptford pink, named after Deptford in southwest England. Not an invasive species, but you see a few of it here and there, but it's just sort of nice to see. A very delicate little pink, five-petaled flower called Deptford pink. So now this is the Concord Land Conservation Trust, and we raised $4.5 million locally. Virtually no internet involved, no GoFundMe, just from people who care about the legacy of the wildlands of Concord and came up with the money. So we are right here The new Brewster's Woods Sanctuary of Mass Audubon's not open to the public yet. That is to the north of here. And this is 3 different hills, or maybe 4 hills. You see Holden Hill, Dakin's Hill, and Ball's Hill. And this is the Concord River. The Great Meadows National Wildlife Refuge is off to the east bank. We're on the west bank here. And so there are a bunch of trails around here which will connect with the new Mass Audubon property. There's lakes and there's woods. Very nice wild area, and all could have been McMansions with no trespassing signs in Chemlawn. But we managed to save it through some people that really cared. They could have bought a yacht or a private airplane or a jet or something, but they gave into land for the future, which is very nice to see. Now, William Brewster took the train over to Bedford, and then he had a little canoe house here right on the edge of the river, and sort of a place for him and his buddies to hang out if he didn't want to go all the way up to his main estate. But it's an interesting spot here is that when we walk along, we get to a point where in this swamp we have a bald cypress, and we'll take you to that. And this is a plant that only is found in the far southeastern United States, and we believe that William Brewster may have brought it up here intentionally or accidentally, because he spent a lot of time in South Carolina. And we were very shocked to see this. Now, we do have bald cypress at Mount Auburn Cemetery and a few botanical gardens here in Massachusetts, but growing way out in the wild is totally unexpected. It blew us away when we saw this. It's the most interesting tree in all of Concord, I say. So let's start our walk on the October Farm riverfront. Probably one of the few plants that people do know by name is the black-eyed Susan. It's obviously in the sunflower daisy family or composites, and it's growing here with this plant from Britain, the Deptford pink. It's not considered a problem. The black-eyed Susan may not be native to New England. It's native to the Great Plains and the Midwest, and it may have come east on its own here as we cleared most of the forests in New England for cattle, goats, and various kinds of ranching. It's sort of a pleasure to sort of gradually become a naturalist in your own hometown area and sort of feel comfortable knowing that most of the plants that I'm seeing I know, and most of the voices of the birds that I hear to know what they are. And yet most people don't know and don't care about the name of any plant, and the birds is just a bird, it's just background noise. But it's nice to be attuned, and so if something unusual is calling and I don't know what it is, then I will focus on trying to find out what it is. This is a very beautiful little walk up here. We'll maybe do it this time on the way back. So I hear the towhee going chewink, chewink. The weep is the great crested flycatcher. Now remember the yarrow we saw in Peggy's garden was yellow, and this is the more common variety, which is white, the yarrow. And the nice thing about yarrow is that it has a Latin name. Most people don't know scientific or Latin names, but this one is sort of understandable because most of us have heard of a gentleman from Greece way back when called Achilles. And this is Achillea, and then that's the genus, and then the specific name is millefolium. So this is the 1,000-leafed plant of Achilles. And so apparently yarrow has some medicinal property on helping with bone spurs, but this is Achillea millefolium, and the English name is yarrow. And as we look here before we get into the woods, we can see the oriental bittersweet and glossy buckthorn are taking over the edges here. And this is deer tongue grass. Most grasses are rather difficult with complicated words to identify, but I guess a deer tongue looks like this, but this is deer tongue grass. And then we have one of our vetches growing here in the legume family. Oh, it's so soft. I don't know if that's an owl feather or not. But most birds exchange feathers every year. Some of them twice a year. But that may be interesting. This is a milkweed not yet in bloom. We're awaiting the arrival of the monarchs. A few of them have come in, but there's more coming later in the summer, we hope. Okay, it's this tree right here, it's starting to come out. We think it was planted around 1900, 120 years ago by William Brewster. And we can see the knees, the cypress knees, those wooden things look like trees that have been chopped down, but that's very typical of the cypress swamps in the southeastern United States. The bald cypress, as we go up, it goes up quite high. It's got up around 80 feet now, and you see very small needles compared to a pine, and they're deciduous. In other words, in October, November, they will shed those needles, and then they will grow them again in the springtime, like the larches or tamaracks. So it's a deciduous conifer, and it may become a common tree here along the Concord River Valley 100 years from now if all the predictions on climate change are true, and many of the species from South Carolina will be growing here. Birds, plants, animals. We expect to have Indian pythons and maybe even American alligators up here if they can get by New York City. But this is the only bald cypress growing in the wild north of coastal Maryland, as far as we know, and a rather attractive thing to have here for the botanists. And bald cypress was one of the trees used by the extinct ivory-billed woodpecker for feeding on big beetles, along with various big pines in the southern forests. But it's a very valuable wood, the bald cypress, and of course a lot of those bottomland forests full of bald cypress have been cleared for lumber and agriculture. But it's just so surprising to see that growing way up here in New England all by itself. And it was a shock once we had access to this property to say, what? What is a bald cypress doing here? It's like it's full of ducks at some seasons, but not right now. Yellow pond lilies are out. That's a bullfrog calling. Jug of rum, jug of rum, jug of rum. So this is the start of the new Audubon Sanctuary.